In the 1960s, the office cubicle changed the way we did our work. Today, many companies, like software design firm Menlo Innovations in downtown Ann Arbor, have given up the cubicle workstation for open spaces and better ability for staff to work together, bring their desks together. But did you know that the cube actually was originated here in Ann Arbor? On Damian on Design on the Lucy Ann Land Show today, we take a look at how cubicles were developed, a great piece written by Nancy Duramity and our guest, Grace Shackman, live in studio along with Damian. You can read about it in the Ann Arbor Observer, June 2014 issue. Grace, nice to have you join Damian and me.
Thank you very much. What a great article.
It was, I had no idea about
It just
this.
stopped me straight in my tracks, and I got on, I sent Grace this email, and within 15 minutes you were back to me, and suddenly here you are on the show talking about it.
How is it the cubicle was developed here in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story. Just to back up on your introduction, Herman Miller is now doing that open office.
The open
Yes.
office, yeah. Right.
They themselves are using their product.
But there's still elements of the cube there. There are still elements of privacy, acoustical, and so on that are going on. But no, the cube itself is up for grabs, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So who was behind this locally?
Okay, well, there was a man named Bob Propst who was a very brilliant inventor.
Propst.
Propst, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I don't really know. I just know the spelling.
P-R-O-P-S-T, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not good at pronouncing things.
And this
Try me on
would
French.
this have been the 1960s then, or 50s?
Yeah, it was, what date do I say in there? It was,
But that was about the era when
Yeah.
the cube came about.
yeah,
Yeah, it was early 60s.
Okay.
yeah.
And so how, was he working for Herman Miller at the time?
He was, my biggest source on all this was a man named Clark Malcolm, and he lives in Ann Arbor, and he works for Herman Miller, and he writes for them. He's a writer. When the rest of the operation moved back to Zealand, he stayed here and kept writing at home, and just doing faxes and, FedEx before you had, email and all that. But so he knew the whole story, but it turned out it was just sort of a fluke that the head of Herman Miller heard Propst give a talk in Colorado when he was visiting his son who was teaching. Dupree was visiting his son in Colorado.
And Dupree was
the president.
Was the president
Herman
of
Miller at the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And he was a brilliant guy who figured out to hire George Nelson, and he had Ames and all these really good.
Yeah, he really saw incredible talent.
Yes, he really
Really
had a
good,
good eye for talent. So he was just thinking, what should he do? And, for some free time he had while his son was busy. And so somebody said, well, go hear this guy speak. He's really an interesting guy. So that's how he first met him, and he was real impressed. He was both an artist, but also a practical guy, a very unusual combination.
I want to read something quickly because I think this sets the context for this man in his mind. What do a vertical timber harvester, a quality control system for concrete, an electronic tagging system for livestock, a mobile office for a quadriplegic lawyer, and Herman Miller's action office system have in common? They were all invented by Robert Propst.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Here we have another Michigan mind, right? Another design thinker. So fascinating, his background, and that this meeting apparently was just really a chance meeting.
Yeah.
That led to what we know today. Or perhaps the cube would have been invented anyway, but maybe not in that time frame.
And so, how did he come up with the idea? Do we have a sense of what was going on?
Well, he had a whole list of things. When he was hired by Herman Miller, he was just going to give them 40% of his time, and he had an enormous list. And he wasn't supposed to interfere with people like Ames, who was their star talent. He was supposed to do other things, not furniture. And of course, he did do furniture and took over the...
He was supposed to look for problems and then provide solutions outside of the furniture.
Exactly.
Well, but he went straight into furniture.
Exactly.
Right, so that must have been an interesting time.
Yeah, they didn't like each other very well. That was real interesting to find out.
You write in your article in the Ann Arbor Observer, Grace Shackman, Propst didn't want to move to Zealand. He wanted to be near an international airport. He decided either Chicago or Ann Arbor would be good, opting for Ann Arbor because the drive to Zealand in the morning would be west, and back to Ann Arbor in the east. That way the sun would never be in his eyes. When these trips were necessary, Propst raced his beloved Porsche across the state.
Yeah, I have a picture, but it didn't make it. There wasn't room for it in the Observer of the old office with his Porsche sitting in front of it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Now, his office in Ann Arbor was on South State Street?
Yes.
Okay.
And then later they moved to Platte Road. But yeah, the original office was just 4 people.
And so when he's conceiving this idea of the cube, I mean, all of a sudden now you're boxing people in. I wonder how that was received back in the day.
Well, he didn't like the idea of boxing in. He didn't think of it. First of all, think about how offices were back then before he got into the business. They were just rows of desks. You've probably seen pictures of offices like the Johnson building.
Yeah, you were either in an office or you were at a desk. In a
Yeah,
row with other
you've seen the
people,
pictures
right.
in Wisconsin of the
Yes.
Frank Lloyd Wright office that he did for Johnson Wax. But, that kind of thing. And that was a very advanced thing. But, rows and rows of desks with no privacy and no room for storage, just whatever is on top of the desk or drawers. So really this was more of an idea to be efficient and have more storage. So you would have this panel, and you could hang shelves on it, or have pictures on it, or whatever you wanted, store things. And he thought of it as that it would be all kinds of configurations, whatever you wanted. Not necessarily box. He didn't want it to be boxy. Yeah, he just wanted it to be like you could arrange it how it worked for you.
And it actually had a standing working component too.
Yeah.
In the first instance, which is also really interesting when you think of how this focus has come back to standing working.
Oh,
now.
yeah.
And now it's now an integral part.
I didn't-
All the manufacturers are making floating tables and raising tables.
Really? I
Yeah.
did not know. I know now they're doing that, but I didn't know that he had actually designed that in the beginning.
From my research,
Yeah.
I don't see any writing about why, other than just the description that it included a standing working area.
I think it was because he had a bad back.
So for himself,
Yeah.
okay, and then that later translated to some of the work that Herman Miller has continued to do for hospitals, right?
Right,
The healthcare work
exactly.
With the CoStruct, which is a rolling standing workstation.
Have you used it in buildings you've done or know about it?
I haven't. I've seen it and I know about it
Uh-huh.
just from our familiarity with the company. But that is essentially taken from when he started in the 60s, and it's still being used today.
Interesting.
That piece of furniture called the CoStruct is still being manufactured in a different form, and it's much more contemporary.
Architect Damian Farrell from Damian Farrell Design Group and his Damian on Design each Saturday on the Lucy Ann Lance Show. Our special guest today is Grace Shackman, who has long been a preservationist. You are a historian. You have chronicled Ann Arbor in its various decades for generations to come, and you really do this for the love of it. You have several books out about old Ann Arbor, old Ypsilanti, Washington.
No, yeah, I haven't written it in Ypsilanti.
Oh, okay. All right. It's just amazing to see the things you've done, though.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, did you learn anything about the man himself? What was he like?
Yeah, he seemed like he was quite a character,
Yeah.
and thought for himself, did what he wanted to do. And the fact that he didn't want to be in the Zealand office where people would be telling him what to do was
I think it was just an excuse to drive the Porsche fast cross country.
Yeah. I'm sure.
And in the practical aspects of where was the
Yeah.
sun.
How interesting, too, you write that the Propst family lived at 2347 Londonderry in a house designed by modern architect David Osler. Kelly remembers that the house was filled with stuff he designed sitting on classic pedestal columns. It was always moving around, so the sculpture was always shaking. Kelly describes Propst as really down to earth. There was nothing pretentious about him. He knew he was smart, but thought life was to be lived.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, I was so lucky to talk to him, and we talked several times, but he was the right-hand man of Propst, so he knew a lot about him. And a lot of these things, Propst's idea, and then Kelly would flesh it out and make it work. And he actually developed whatever the thing is that can make the 90-degree angle to make the cube possible.
Oh,
Really?
He wasn't thinking that that's what he wanted it for, but he...
really?
So the connector piece, you
Yeah.
mean that ensures that it connects in different formats and maintains its angle?
made sure that it goes is this a 90-degree
Yes,
angle? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he came up with that.
Because one of his quotes is, the solution is easy if you can define the problem.
Yeah, well, when you were talking about CoStruct, he was in the hospital for his back, and of course, being the guy, you get the idea he was brilliant at just always thinking. So he's lying there on his back, and he sees the nurses come in and out, and he sees how they're doing things inefficiently, and he starts thinking, well, if they put this here, and if they always did this, and pretty soon he's got this new product that's, for hospitals.
Which has endured now for 50, going on 60 years now.
Wow. So, Grace, this company goes back some 50 years, right?
Herman Miller?
The actual portion that Propst was working on in Ann Arbor here.
Would you look at my article?
Yes, 1960.
Okay,
So,
I'm
1960, he became the head of that group for Herman Miller.
Oh, thank you.
So was it,
I'm just having this meltdown that I can't remember the date. I'm very bad at dates, so people can't believe.
so was was it, how long did he stay in that one place? Or you said it moved over to...
They got bigger and they started looking at the whole study of office systems. But I talked to another guy who worked there for him a little later. He was a dean of agriculture at MSU, and he was one of the first ones to buy the system, so they became good friends. And he told me how really when Propst started doing this, offices were just sort of an add-on to factories. They would just be a room off the factory, and people hadn't really thought about how they should be managed or what they should do. Yeah. I mean, we think of this white-collar thing as being forever, but it really was fairly recently.
Yeah.
Do you know if the first one that he constructed is around anywhere?
Well, the first one he constructed, he had the ideas, and then they had George Nelson, who was the chief designer for Herman Miller, to actually figure out the details.
Yeah.
And Propst didn't really like it that well. And it wasn't for one thing, it had these separate pieces. Propst liked that there were a lot of pieces, and you could pick and choose. And if something didn't work, you could throw it out and get something that did work.
And you could reconfigure it in a different fashion.
Usually you pay a ton for furniture, and then you just have to use it
as it comes.
Till it falls apart, unless you're very, very rich. Or you don't want to waste it. But this was very flexible. But the one that Nelson did, it had these separate pieces that were totally separate, and it didn't have enough desk room. Propst liked the desk that had like a roll-down top. You could have your work there and then roll down the top to hide it. Anyway, it wasn't exactly what he had in mind. And Nelson got an award for it. I mentioned this in the...
Right.
And he didn't even mention Propst.
Oh, gosh. And the original office system was called Action Office?
It was first called Action Office 1, and then Action Office 2. But 2 was the one that really took off. And then they just started calling 2 Action Office.
It's called it Action Office.
The first one, too, it got an Alcoa award, but that was just because it was made with aluminum.
Alcoa was really pushing themselves.
Grace Shackman, the article is called Birth of the Cubicle Farm, and it's in the June 2014 Ann Arbor Observer, a fascinating piece about the start of the cubicle right here in Ann Arbor. Tell us about your co-author.
Nancy Durrani. She is an archivist at the Bentley, and she's the one who met these two people. Well, she met Clark Malcolm through her work at the Bentley. She met his wife, and his wife told her that her husband worked for Herman Miller. So one thing led to another. That he and this other guy, Steve Frankenheim, I don't know how you say his name, but they came and gave a talk. And I arranged for it to be at 3 Chairs because I'd done an article about 3 Chairs. So it was a perfect location with all the modern furniture, and it was well attended. So Nancy was the one who sort of started this whole ball rolling, and then it was at this talk that I got the idea, I didn't know about this Ann Arbor connection. Maybe that would make a good article. So I went up and talked to them, and they said, sure, they'd tell me more what they knew. And then Nancy could work with the Herman Miller archive because she was an archivist at Bentley. So she got some wonderful pictures and information, and we interviewed Clark Malcolm together.
But it's interesting that in your article as well, you quote that West Michigan has remained the largest producer of office furniture, even to this day.
Right.
When you think of the competition worldwide, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And they lost the furniture to the house furniture, couches and chairs and stuff to North Carolina and now abroad. But they keep doing furniture.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem that Michigan gets credit.
No, Michigan is a real hotspot of modernism. what I've been discovering. I mean, between Cranbrook with all these talented people, the
Yeah.
Saradins and Charles Ames, and the car industry with these, big fin cars,
Yeah.
modern cars.
Mhm.
And we have all kinds of wonderful modern architects who
Mhm.
worked out of U of M.
Right.
And then Herman Miller,
Yeah.
which did the Ames chair and all.
Yeah.
all
No, it
that
is.
stuff.
It's been part of our journey has been this Michigan as a state of design and discovering for ourselves
Right.
people, organizations, groups that have just done extraordinary things that have a worldwide impact
Yeah,
over
and
decades and decades and
and-
held their position.
we're just at the tail end of talking to some of these people. Like, of course, Propst was gone,
Yeah.
but I was able to talk to two people that worked with him, so, at least they were still around. But
Yeah.
and some of these modern architects that practiced in Ann Arbor, I've been lucky to talk to, like Bob Metcalf and David Osler,
Right.
but they're both in their 90s, so I'm very happy to
Mhm.
Yeah.
be able
To
to
have
talk.
captured some of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I was talking about earlier, about what you have done for so many of us to capture the history of our town. You have a brochure that you've given us, Old West Side Historic and Architectural Walking Tour. When did you put this together?
Oh, it's my most recent product, so that's why I brought it, just to show you, or to give it to you.
It's beautiful. So you can put this in your car
Mhm.
and drive around the Old West Side of Ann Arbor, which is where exactly? What is considered the Old West Side?
Well, it's confusing because there's a historic core, and then there's a little bigger area that's called the neighborhood.
Mhm.
Because when they made it a historic district, they thought it was a little too small for a real, enough people to be, a real group. So they extended it west and south a little. But the core is basically from the Ann Arbor Railroad tracks to 7th, and then to Huron, and, what would the street be, Cook?
Mhm. Okay.
This is great. It's
Yeah.
full of
Beautifully done.
old-time pictures, a description of each of the houses. What's your favorite?
Oh, that would be hard to say, yeah. But I got a graphic artist who I've long admired to do it, which really made a difference. Mike Savitsky, he did wonderful work.
I
And
lived at 442 2nd Street.
Oh,
for a
yeah,
number of
that's
years,
right,
And
that's
you
right,
shared
first
some of
met you.
those horror stories of renovating that
Yes.
house on this show, impaling myself on old spikes and face full of hornets' nests and so on. This is wonderful to see such a gathering of incredible information.
How have we done preserving our old structures? And
Great question.
Oh, well, we for a while there, we were doing really well. And lately, we seem to have kind of lost the will to do historic districts, which is too bad. I mean,
Why do you think that is?
people seem to have a reaction. I don't want people to tell me what to do.
Okay.
And they had another proposal on the table at one time, and I keep waiting for them to actually pass it, which would be not allowing people to build something more than a little bit bigger than what they tear down.
Okay.
So that those 7 beautiful houses just beyond the library on Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
That were torn down for those 2 ugly student
Mm-hmm.
apartments. That wouldn't have been allowed to happen, because if you tore down one of those houses, you just could build one thing a little bigger and one thing a little bigger.
Oh.
So it wouldn't be, worth the big investors.
Well, you could assemble a lot and then do something that aggregated everything together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
as someone who grew up here in Ann Arbor, I thought I had hit every street at some point in my life until, I think it was last year, had to pick someone up who lived on Mulholland. I had never been down
Oh, isn't that a
Mulholland.
beautiful street?
Oh, it's darling.
Beautiful street.
And you have written in here the water pumping station number 2, which is in Mulholland, and this has been renovated, I think it's condos or something
Yeah,
now.
it is.
In 1896, you write, the Ann Arbor Water Works, taking advantage of natural springs, built a pumping station here to supplement the water from their Sunset Street reservoir. In 1922, they replaced the wooden building with a brick one, which they used for offices and a repair shop. The home of the Ann Arbor Civic Theater from 62 until 81. I didn't know that.
You must have gone to that, or you've been in some of those places.
I mostly was Civic Theater after the later 80s. When it was converted to 6 apartments, now condos, it was an early example of adaptive reuse. Note the landscaping on your right, designed and planted by neighborhood volunteers.
Yeah, oh yeah, there was a couple, the Wallaces, who lived in one of the end condo, and it was just sort of overgrown sludge that the city maybe cut down with a scythe is the word or something, but just ugly. And they got permission to plant there, and they did a beautiful job.
What's interesting now, that's in the floodplain. Now we can't do that. we can't live in the floodplain anymore. You could never convert that building
Although
to anything.
I did see there's property there that someone owns on Mulholland that came up on local real estate offerings, and it talks about how you'd have to build it up on stilts. I don't know if the city would allow that or not, but it actually says in there.
Well, there are some other condos back behind there that are up on stilts.
Are they? All right.
I've told several people that I know that are looking for, to downsize and have an easy thing when they're older, but it wouldn't work for them because you have to go
Up the stairs.
more stairs than you would
Well,
in a
Lucy,
private
remember
home.
Tresna, who was on our show?
Yes.
She lives on Mulholland.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
so-
right.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
It's a delightful street.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, well, it's a quintessential thing about the older side. They're modest homes, just maybe 6 rooms, living room, dining room, kitchen downstairs, and 2 or 3 bedrooms upstairs, and all sort of the same or mirror images. But it goes down, down to where the spring was, floodplain.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you stand at the top and you just see those identical roofs going down in a row,
Yes.
it's just gorgeous.
It is
It is.
really pretty.
It's like some of the row houses in San Francisco, the beauty of the
Yeah.
repetition down the slope.
Yeah, exactly.
Grace, where can people pick up Old West Side Historic and Architectural Walking Tour, this brochure?
I'm not really sure.
You've got
Well,
to
we're
get these
plugging it
out to
today.
people. Yeah. Is it the library, perhaps? Have you talked with anyone at the library? to put this in?
The Old West Side board paid for printing, so I'm kind of letting them decide how to.
Okay. It's
how to
beautiful,
distribute them.
absolutely
I mean, they're
lovely.
going to distribute them. I'm going to lead a walk at the end of the month, and they're going to be distributed there. And there's another event at Bill's. Look on the Old West. Tell
The
people.
Old West Side website there.
Yes,
on the
yes.
Ann Arbor Old West. And
Yeah, there are 2 events where I know they'll pass them out, but.
Well, this works
Beyond
well
that, I
with
don't
the
know.
American Institute of Architects. The Huron Valley chapter did that walking tour of
Right.
downtown.
Right.
And the 35 significant buildings in the downtown area. This is a nice compliment for anyone,
Oh, yeah.
for the 2 visiting
Yeah.
this town and just interested in these older neighborhoods.
Here you go. Sunday, June 29th at Boss School at Jefferson at 2 p.m. It is the inaugural Old West Side Spring Tour. Going to roll out the Old West Side Historic and Architectural Walking Tour by Grace Shackman. Grace and board members will stroll the neighborhood for a special highlight of some of the walking tour sites, and they will end up at the Washtenaw Dairy for some
Yes.
free
Where
ice
else?
cream.
Donuts.
Even if they're not interested in the walk, they'll show up.
Oh, actually, that was last year's tour, right?
No, they put the wrong date on.
Data.
Somebody else
Okay.
put it out.
Okay, great.
It says,
Coming up though at the end of the
yeah,
month. All right.
everything's correct except the 20, it should be 2014.
2014, got it.
Yeah.
And you can go to oldwestside.org for more information, oldwestside.org.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm really looking forward to going through this and learning more about the history of
Yeah.
Ann Arbor.
Well, something, if like the Chamber of Commerce or someone would pay me, I would do one of any neighborhood,
Wouldn't that be great?
That would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that I had, and Mike did it beautifully, is to have the old picture, right on where the write-up is.
Right.
So people can stand there looking at the old picture
And see what it looks like today.
See
Yeah,
what it looks like today.
and they
yeah.
don't have to keep,
Right.
All right,
looking
seriously,
around.
what's your favorite building or house?
I
There's
have not
gotta be
really-
something. Is there any story or anything about a home that is particularly intriguing?
I mentioned that last night I was on CBN and they were asking me, what's your favorite story? My favorite story or my favorite house is always what I'm doing right now. And I almost forget what I've passed, and it's embarrassing that people...
These are all your babies.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
Grace, you are such a treasure for this town.
Thank
You
you.
really are.
And to uncover the fact that the office cubicle was actually done right here in Ann Arbor
Yeah.
by a man named Propst.
And he didn't even like the idea of the cubicle. That's what's really interesting. And I think a comparison, I was just thinking about this today, Victor Gruen, who developed the malls,
Yes.
he came from Europe, and there are these beautiful, like in Milan,
The other Milan.
Yeah, right. The Nichols Arcade or
Yes.
the...
Oh, right.
There are some in Vienna.
Yeah, and in
similar
Brussels.
kinds of shopping experiences.
Yeah, and they're just beautiful.
Yeah.
But then here they got
They got
changed.
yeah.
Of what a mall really was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can pick up a copy of the June 2014 Ann Arbor Observer and read Grace Shackman and Nancy DeRomedy's story on the birth of the cubicle farm. It's a fascinating read. Thank you so much, Grace.
Oh, it's
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Grace, so much. Really appreciate it.
On Damian on Design with Damian Farrell, local architect on the Lucy Ann Land Show. And this is 1290 WLBY. Excellent, John.
Oh,
Thank you
well,
so
thank
so
you.
interesting.
Well, you did a lot of
Appreciate
homework.
it. Well, no.